Hello, welcome to Free Will, Science, and Religion. I'm Chandler Klebs, and I'm here with George Ortega, Quayd, Jamie Soden, and wsdtime. And we're going to talk about which of two views is more harmful. The libertarian view, which is that people have free will, therefore determinism must be false. Those people often try to use quantum randomness or something to claim free will. And then there's compatibilists, which try to say, well, yeah, like determinism is true, but somehow people are still responsible and can still be blamed. And they'll often redefine responsibility or redefine free will. And we've talked a lot about both of these views in many of our podcasts. And we are refuting, like, guys, like, we're all refuting on this podcast the idea that free will is compatible with either determinism or indeterminism. There's no version of reality that makes being your own mother, basically, being the self-causer of your own thoughts, desires, intentions, and actions. I like how Mitch J put it in that previous podcast. So, like, guys, I'm sure we would probably all agree that both libertarians and compatibilists are wrong in the sense that they're still trying to hold on to some idea that people are responsible in the blameworthy sense. But the question remains, which of those two wrong views is more harmful, more or less harmful? So, does anyone have any opinions on that?
All right, let me start by I think that in general, the question is like whether those who are kind of like reaching the wrong conclusion because of weaker intellects are more dangerous than those who are reaching the wrong conclusion. I think willfully because of immorality. The libertarian view, I think, is just like a lack of their ability to understand causality, whereas I think the compatibilist view is a lack of morality and a kind of like lying to themselves, deceiving themselves, and then deceiving others. Now, in terms of which is more dangerous, that's still an open question to me.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, the reason that I asked, so I mean, I'm inclined to say that libertarian free will is more harmful um, uh, than compatibilism. And just from what I've read, I think blame has a lot to do with it on both sides. But it seems to me that whenever you're reading a compatibilist, um, they're much less likely to blame people in certain circumstances. They almost push the blame dial a little. They dial it back a little bit, whereas libertarians are more willing to blame more people. So to me, I kind of thought that's why I wanted to see what everybody thought, because I think that's an interesting opinion. I don't know if all compatibilists are lying. I don't know if Daniel Dennett really knows that free will is ridiculous, but continues to advocate for it anyway. But if you look at someone like him and, well, many evangelicals who are libertarian, a lot of libertarians are highly religious and dogmatic. Whereas compatibilists, I think George said it pretty well, there seems to be an intellectual chasm where once people are more kind of distinguished intellectually or have higher intellectual credentials, they tend the chances are they're more likely compatibilist than libertarian, and I think that to me, not acknowledging determinism as a reality of the universe is more harmful than acknowledging it, but still really not getting the point that if you really boil free will down to its essential definitions, it doesn't make a lot of sense, and it can still cause us to blame people we shouldn't blame. So I guess that's why I brought it up, because um, I, because I wanted to know what other people's thoughts were, and I really did think, like, to me, if you have a chance, if there's anybody that you're going to convince, I think it would be more likely a compatibilist than a libertarian, at least in my opinion.
Well, I think that I agree with everything that George and Quayd just said. And here's my thoughts on it is that I feel like, yeah, like we can't lump everyone together as far because, well, I mean, as far as there are different compatibilists and different libertarians which may have different levels of intelligence and reasons for their positions. However, it's still one that I struggle with knowing for sure which of those two views is worse. Like, if I could push like, if the hypothetical button situation where I have the option of everybody being libertarian or everyone being compatibilist, and trying to think which of those two has less suffering, well, I think Quaid may be right that compatibilists are less likely to blame because at some level it's like they believe in significantly less free will because at least they're believing in a different kind of free will than the libertarians. But
Yeah.
yeah, so I agree with that. And yet it's also kind of interesting because I guess I just have a strong disliking of compatibilism in general because I see it as so dishonest. You know, like my thought is that libertarians are libertarians because they have not thought about it. They've not taken the time, maybe because they haven't had the reason to look into it, and so they just copy whatever answer there may be in defense of free will, and they never even look into the determinism, the indeterminism question. Whereas I feel like, yeah, compatibilists are generally more educated in the sense that they know people don't really have free will, but that they are trying to promote a version of free will that still lets them blame people. And it's like their cleverness and their intelligence is used for evil in a sense. So it's hard to know. I still am. I still question that because I feel like someone has to be, to a certain extent, dishonest to be compatibilist, and they have to be somewhat um, misinformed or ignorant to be libertarian. So it's still a close match, and I'm just not sure.
Hmm. Yeah, I see what you guys are saying. I didn't really look at, like, I genuinely think a lot. I understand that there charlatans exist. Like, I understand that that isn't an actual concept. Like, people actually trying to deceive other people. But I generally try to take people as genuine. So when someone actually thinks they're a compatibilist, I figure that there's some type of definition that they have of both of those terms that truly is reconcilable to them. Even though I think that they really misunderstand what free will means fundamentally for a lot of people. Um, but I think that the reason that I say that is because, at least from what I've read of compatibilists and libertarians, if you talk to a libertarian, pretty much everybody has free will. But if you read a compatibilist, that's when they're going to start to say, well, obviously people who aren't well educated don't have free will. You know, like, they're more likely to say things like that. Like, people who aren't educated, they don't have the ability to make free choices because they're restricted so heavily by life. But at some point in life, you become so wealthy and intelligent that all of a sudden you're actually free in the will sense. It still doesn't make a lot of sense, but I think they're more likely to sympathize with the poor. They're more likely to sympathize with people who have um, mental, I don't know what you call it, ailments, mental issues, basically. So they're more likely to sympathize with those people and say those people don't have free will. Whereas if you talk to a libertarian, of course, poor people have free will, and they could just, if they could just rise up, they would do it. If you talk to someone like Daniel Dennett, he does not at all think that people in ghettos, colored people in ghettos, have, the free will or capacity to make all the right choices. He said stuff like that openly. But that's also a generalization. I'm only going off of the compatibilists and libertarians that I've read. But that's almost always a circumstance.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, Quaid, and it's very interesting because yeah, it's almost like compatibilists are at a stage where they have realized that some people don't have free will. Like if they don't have certain opportunities, certain information, intelligence, money, whatever, then they can't make a so-called free choice. They're not at the point yet where they understand that there is no such thing as a free choice. They're not at that point yet, but are they perhaps on the road of progress towards something better?
Yeah, I see your point, Quaid. It seems like that while both are wrong, libertarians are more wrong. It's more mistaken to deny causality than to just feel that you can have free will with causality. I mean, both are I think deeply logically flawed. And I think, yeah, I also agree, Quaid, with your assessment that it may not be a moral distinction. In other words, the compatibilists may genuinely morally, not understand that they generally don't understand the implications of causality.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I think that's a fair way to put it. They don't understand the implications, or, I mean, it is still highly ridiculous though, because like causality is causality, right? So you've accepted causality, but you're saying at some point that causality breaks down in some funky way, where it no longer matters to privileged people.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and you know, guys, like I think there is a progression. Now, for me, it happened fairly quickly because, see, I had been exposed to George's show, and then I was thinking about it, and I got, well, yeah, I didn't choose who my parents were or where I was born and all that. I realized all that, but I'm like, well, I still make choices, and it just took a while for me to understand that, well, the things that I do choose are determined by everything that I did not choose, meaning I don't choose what I choose. you know and so it's like I think, yeah, maybe we need to be allies with these people who are on the stages. They're in a middle stage somewhere of accepting that free will is an illusion. They're just not there yet.
Yeah, or possibly, maybe not allied with them, but reaching out to them in some ways, and maybe finding that common ground. Because again, these people, they're more likely to sympathize with the disenfranchised and the minority groups.
yeah. All right. So now, the one thing I think that libertarians and compatibilists have in common is that they don't really understand causality. Because if libertarians really understood it, they wouldn't deny it. And if compatibilists really understood it, they couldn't conclude that you can have a free will with it. So then another consideration is what we mean by dangerous. Certainly there are many, many more compatibilists than there are libertarians. And actually, compatibilists are aligned with determinists against libertarians. So, in a certain sense, compatibilists are more dangerous in the sense that they're just so much more numerous. But then the question becomes which of the two groups is more amenable to gaining a correct understanding? I mean, would it be easier for compatibilists to understand that there is no, you know, that causality has to apply to all human decisions, or is it easier to get libertarians to understand that there has to be causality?
Yeah. Um, and another question to add to that then is, I mean, so like who do you think would be more likely to be a Republican, a compatibilist or a libertarian?
That's a good question.
I would my guess would be in the libertarian camp. Like I think libertarians would be more likely to be Republican.
Huh, I'm
Because
interested in hearing why that may be.
Yep, definitely libertarian.
What?
Huh?
I think Will said definitely libertarian.
Yeah, because they're more likely to blame. I mean, just off of faith, going off of what I've read of compatibilists, again, which is a generalization, but still, Republicans are more likely to blame poor people and tell them they need to pick themselves up by the bootstraps. And you get more of that libertarian ideology, whereas compatibilists, when you talk to them, are more Democrat. They still want to hold the privileged accountable. Is basically, it seems to be to me their sticking point. Like they want to be able to hold people of privilege accountable, like bankers or whoever else, but they don't want to. They want everybody to leave poor people alone and to actually try to help them. And that seems more compatibilist to me. Like I understand the determinist components of the poor person situation, even though when you become educated enough, that's no longer an excuse for some reason.
Huh. Yeah, it is interesting. It's almost like there's a little double standard there where they are applying greater responsibility to the more privileged people. But I think it's a matter of practicality why they're doing that. It may not be because it may not be a double standard philosophically, but may actually just be that they have a very practical way they want to go about it and hold people responsible in the pragmatic way. Um, and it's like of course, guys, I'm fine with that. I'm just saying, as long as we understand that nobody is truly to blame and we're not seeking revenge on them, I'm okay with the practical approach because it does make sense.
Yeah. And to go off of George's, because what do we mean by harmful? That's really where, even though I've said everything I've said, that's really where the confusion is. Because to me, like, even though obviously the Republican ideology is harmful directly, blaming the poor, uh, if you're a Democrat and you're compatibilist and you're blaming, rich people, you really don't want to work with them or be around them at that point, and that can also be harmful because it stifles progress in a lot of ways. Because instead of like asking why are these people making these clearly immoral choices and then trying to go from there, you end up blaming them and pushing them to the other side and having and wanting nothing to do with them, which can also hurt the system or make it hard to change things. So that's the harmful component. Like, which one is more harmful, to actually just blame poor people or not try to work with the system because you're too busy blaming the system as this like higher, this system should know better type mentality, right? Like rich people should know better than to hoard all their money. They should just know. And if they don't, I'm going to yell at them and scream at them, and until they don't want anything to do with me either. And then that's a that we're at an impasse at that point.
Yeah, Quaid, I just gotta say, just think about how insane that type of logic is, that people should just know things. There's things they should just know, like, where are they gonna pull this knowledge from? Out of thin air or what?
Good question.
And yeah, so I agree, Quaid, that's very harmful because when people blame people for not pulling knowledge that they should know supposedly out of nowhere, and then blaming them and being mean to them, well, yeah, that just creates more hostility and more violence. So yeah, that I see that that's a problem, yeah, just as much among Democrats as Republicans, you might say, or with any other groups.
All right, so but which of the two groups do you think are more amenable to like having their mistaken logic be corrected?
That's a tough one too.
Well, hey, I think may have an answer for this, and the reason that I think so is because I listened to a conversation between Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett recently, and they had written some stuff, but their exchanges didn't go well. But in a recent podcast on Sam Harris's Waking Up with Sam Harris podcast, he actually got Daniel Dennett down for a talk, and they had a long conversation about free will. And it just occurred to me recently, would a libertarian talk with Sam Harris? And you've got to consider, would a libertarian even be willing to talk with either a compatibilist or an incompatibilist? You have to wonder. And whereas I think that compatibilists will at least engage with incompatibilists, you might say, hard incompatibilists or determinists like us, compatibilists may at least be more likely to discuss it than libertarians.
Yeah, and I think that goes back to them being more likely to be. I think it's possible that libertarians are more likely to be religiously dogmatic. Not that compatibilists aren't dogmatic, because they're dogmatic about the idea of free will, but to be religiously dogmatic, which means that they've told themselves that you're the devil and that they shouldn't have anything to do with you. Whereas compatibilists, at least some of them, aren't. Daniel Dennett is not at all religious, and so he has no restrictions about trying to engage and evolve on that issue.
Yeah, that's very true. I agree, Quayd, because we have to consider that mentality where people like, oh, you're evil, so I will not even talk to you. That's a harmful attitude right there.
Oh, got a spider on my desk. It went.
And yeah, and again, the other question related to both groups is like, what do they need to hear? Again, as we've explored in the past, scientists are discovering that people hold their views not because they've looked at the evidence logically and weighed the different um, factors, but because of these things that aren't necessarily related to logic, like their emotional needs and all. So, I'm wondering um, if the answer to both groups just really doesn't have as much to do with logic as it has to do uh, with understanding the non-logical processes. Like, for example, like Republicans tend to believe what their parents told them and what tradition tells them more than Democrats. So yeah, what non-logical arguments may actually swing them, that maybe they haven't heard them enough, maybe they haven't heard them in the right way.
That's
Yeah,
actually,
yeah.
I was just going to say that's quite interesting, because whenever I argue with a libertarian, they quite often say that I'm denying the existence of free will because it makes me feel better about being a loser. So they kind of twist it and use an emotional appeal.
Hey, that sounds more like an insult.
Yeah, Dave,
Yeah.
David, it sounds like they're basically calling you a loser.
Yeah, how do they know that?
Yeah, how
David,
would they know if you're a loser or not? Only you can know that.
Yeah,
David,
they must have been spying
response
on
to
me.
them, David, my response to them is like, I'm a vegan, and like, so I say, no, this is really helpful to me to not hate all the carnists in the world.
Oh, I so second what George said. Completely agree with that one. Because
Yeah.
I would be hating them all if I believed in free will still.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And going off of like Chandler and George are saying something that's like making me think, because when you talk about compatibilists, that if you've ever watched, Daniel Dennett has a video where he tries to explain this. I'm always trying to understand everybody, but them in particular, and things like justice come up, or choice, not actually free will, but other words that are associated with free will, and those seem to be the things that they're interested in preserving. But if you watch this video, I wish I could pull it up, but the way he's wording it in such a way that it makes it sound right. Have you seen the video where he's like in the church and someone's asking him about free will, and he's basically like, well, who's the one doing it? I forget how exactly he phrased it. I don't want to misquote him, because he does say it in a way that makes it sound compelling. Um, but when you consider really all the arguments, it starts to like fade into, it's fade into like obscurity. Like you can't really understand it once you think about it too much, but kind of just the way that he phrases it in the moment makes you think, oh, there's something to this type thing. Nobody's probably seen that video with him in the church.
I don't think I've seen that one.
It does seem like there's some verbal trickery on the part of some compatibilists.
Well, also like with Dennett, uses the word inevitable and evitable.
Yeah.
Is it avoidable? Well, the thing that he's missing is that like we don't know. It's like we can't foretell the future. So how are we supposed to know if something's edible or inedible? Inevitable,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, how do we know what's edible? Get into talking about food.
Yeah.
Yeah, see,
It sounds like you're talking about food. Makes me even more hungry.
because George meant to say it inevitable and inevitable.
Inevitable, yeah.
He said edible and inedible. Yeah, well, yeah, that's a good point. And I did see the video where Daniel Dennett was talking about things being evitable. And that one was very interesting because I had my simple response was that, well, whether or not you evited it, avoided it, was also inevitable due to the prior causes that led to it happening the way it did.
Yeah.
Here's something I'm not actually all that clear about myself in terms of like libertarians and compatibilists, but like, do they both hold the same misunderstanding of prediction? Because a lot of people say, well, like, if you can't predict, something, it can't be caused. I mean, is that more of a libertarian view, or do compatibilists also share that misunderstanding?
I would say that's probably equal.
Okay.
Possibly. Yeah. I mean, like, it seems like both of them, like, yeah. So the problem is that they don't seem to understand that the system is so complex that just because you don't have every component to the system to say this is what's going to happen doesn't mean there isn't a system going on.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Huh.
I had another response to the libertarian kind of like accusation that you're trying to just get away with stuff, and then you're just trying to make excuses for yourself. And that argument, that counter argument, can be posed both naturalistically and theistically. Is that like naturalistically, the argument is, well, you're just trying to be like as omnipotent as the laws of nature. You're just trying to like pretend you're in control, when the laws of nature control everything. And to a theist, well, you're just like trying to be God. You're trying to like assume this power that we don't have.
Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, it is a very interesting thing. I mean, at this point, like, before I wasn't sure, at this point, I sort of lean towards the idea that libertarians are generally more harmful because of the fact that they won't even accept determinism as the way things are. And yeah, it's almost like they're so often religiously dogmatic about it and defending free will for certain non-logical reasons that they're harder, if not impossible, to have a conversation with. So really, we should be reaching out to the compatibilists and finding that common ground where we can all agree on how to run things under the truth of the way things actually are.
So is part of that then kind of like trying to assuage their fears and say, no, civilization is not going to collapse when people get that nothing is up to us?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's like Daniel Dennett's one of his strongest positions, right? I mean, like there are studies, and that's something I wanted to talk about. I was gonna bring up for another one, is discussing those studies, the studies that do show that people, and again, there are problems with the studies, but they do seem to show that people who tentatively accept free will or kind of non-permanently are more likely to cheat or even in some instances hand out heavier punishments. There's been a study on that too, that I forget what it was exactly, but people were more likely to sabotage someone's meal or something like that, and it's because the idea was that it's because it allows them to absolve their own bad behavior, absolve themselves of their own bad behavior. But that would be in a world where just they didn't have free will. Like, hopefully, if they recognize the other person also didn't have free will, they would never want to blame that person to put the hot sauce in there in the first place, or at least that's the logical conclusion.
That's
so it can be a
point, Quayd. That's a very good point.
So, and that was another thing that I wanted to bring up is not just like just a determinism is good, but that you can also be a determinist and still have bad and negative views of people, it seems like. So does that need to be combined with humanism? Does it need to be combined with logic as well, so that you're making the logical connections and you have the emotional capacity that you actually care? Because you could be a determinist and be like, okay, it's nobody's fault, but I don't care. I still don't like people. I just don't like them, and that's who I am. And still be a determinist and still want to hurt people.
Yeah, that's true. And it's very interesting because I feel like that is sort of someone who doesn't really understand determinism. Because it does seem like if they did, then their reason for wanting to hurt people is diminished because they no longer feel like they deserve it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Quaid, in terms of those experiments, I mean, as I explained in my book on free will and climate change denial, and basically, there are serious flaws in at least the one about cheating on I think some math problems and stuff, and also like there was actually a pretty famous paper published that focused on psychological experiments that haven't been able to be replicated. That they're just like, and actually that same experiment, that showed that non-believers in free will cheated more, and it actually was only like they what was it? It's like the non-free will believers cheated 12 times out of 20, and free will believers cheated 9 times out of 20. So it really wasn't all that different anyhow. But this famous paper just found that particular study was just non-reproducible. So I think those experiments are conducted by people who kind of like have on some level acknowledge that they've lost the intellectual fight, but they still want to maintain the belief in free will. So now they're kind of like playing politics with it.
Yeah, they have an alternative agenda. I would agree, and that's also the same study where these weren't people who naturally accepted determinism. They have no idea whether they did or not, but they prompted them by just a quote by a scientist, right? So they were just like, this scientist says free will doesn't exist. So this isn't someone who's incorporated determinism, sat down, thought about what it means for their life and for the lives of others. They were just given immediate prompt, right? Which, if you don't take time to think about it, you might just absolve yourself and not think about the larger pictures of things, because you really are encountering it right now.
These researchers were they were crafty. In other words, like when they were telling people, priming them to believe in free will, one of the statements they use is like, your free will allows you to behave morally, right? Whereas like when they were priming people without, to believe they didn't use equivalent statements. They didn't say like, even though you don't have a free will, you can still behave morally. So again, they were skewing the understanding of what free will and non-free will means.
Yeah, I didn't read that part. I've read other parts of it, so I know a little bit about it, but that would also be highly ridiculous.
Yeah, that's part of the reason that's ridiculous is because it conflates free with being moral. How in the world would that even make sense? Because I mean, it seems like being free, if there can't even be such a thing anyway, but if there was, how would being free somehow make you more free to be moral than free to be immoral? I don't get that one.
Yeah.
That's a great point, Chandler. Yep.
Well, it goes back to maybe that's another podcast we could do, because I think Dave, I've had the same exact thing, and it's that David had, where people basically say, oh, you're just a loser and you want to feel better about yourself, or they say you're an immoral person and you want to feel better about yourself. They say a bunch of different things. Like they just try to, they try to attach it to me, and not the actual argument being made. It's obviously fallacious. But why that happens, and why, the fact that people seem to have this strong connection between morality and positive positive moral and positive personal behaviors and free will, and determinism to them is, I guess, just the opposite.
Yeah, it's a very strange one because it's not a connection that one can logically make. I don't think it logically follows that your belief in free will automatically makes you more or less moral. Rather, though, it's like it changes your whole idea of morality and removes justifications based on the idea of deserve.
Yeah.
And actually, there is a study that showed that free will disbelievers were more likely to be more reasonable or compassionate toward people theoretically, accused of a crime. Like in this experiment, those who believed in free will concluded that a theoretical person who did something wrong should be punished twice as severely. So, I think this free will belief kind of like subverts our sense of morality.
Yeah, I've read those studies as well too, and I think they're really interesting. I'm really careful with studies because I don't want to seem biased, right? Like I don't want to seem like, oh, well, your studies are crap and my studies are awesome. But that being said, I still think I'm being fair about it. Yeah, I read those studies too, and it does seem like people. And there's also that study that shows that people who believe in free will are more likely to be politically conservative and are more likely to want to take retribution out on people. So there's a lot of studies equating the belief in free will with very, really just immoral and negative ideas.
I would say that rich people are probably more likely to believe in free will because they believe that they have what they deserve. They work hard and they deserve to have their riches. And there are lots of studies that show that rich people are actually more likely to lie, cheat, and steal. So that's quite interesting to me.
Yeah, we may get a major ally after November in disproving free will, because as if the Democrats win the presidency, as pretty much they're expected to, and Hillary has enough of an intellect, I think she'll realize, and the Democrats will realize, wait a minute, yes, the linchpin, the foundation of so much of conservative ideology is this free will belief. This Horatio Alger's, if this guy could do it, everybody can, and like, just blaming the poor for being poor, based on free will. So, ordinarily sometimes it's not good for philosophical issues, to get into the realm of politics. But I hope that the Democratic Party and progressives understand that by getting the world to understand that there's no free will, that's a powerful way to just like to undo this foundation to blame and hatred and this kind of like unfairness that the free will belief allows.
Yeah, but Democrats have had a while. I mean, you look at a guy like Jimmy Carter. Like I don't know if I'm pretty sure he hasn't said anything formally, so I'm kind of being presumptuous here. But he certainly hasn't spoken out against free will. But that guy seems really compassionate to me. That guy seems like if anybody was going to get that free will is an illusion, it should be that guy. But he hasn't. So I don't know if if we can rely on Hillary, even though I would agree she's more likely to be inclined to accept this idea than a figure like Donald Trump, just because of that example.
Exactly.
Because we've had very compassionate Democratic candidates in the past, and they don't jive with the idea either. It seems like maybe he really does, and he just doesn't express it at all.
Right. Quayd, I think the problem may be that 80-90% of Americans believe in God or a higher power, and I think the vast majority of those people believe that God is good. And so, in other words, like to
And no, I would say God is more evil.
No, I know, and then that's the reality. God is both good and evil, but the predominant belief is that God is good, and like to the extent that people understand that we humans don't have a free will, all of a sudden it's God's fault. The Holocaust is God's fault. You know, the 9/11 is God's fault. The global poverty, I mean, everything that's evil in the world is God's fault, and that is a very tough kind of like ideology to to counter. You know, one of our major challenges is going to have to be to accept. You know, I mean, like, granted, many of us are atheists, so like that question doesn't relate to us personally. But in terms of swaying a public that's like majorly theistic, you know, we got to find some kind of way to address that particular, I think, belief that I think accounts for like, you know, I think it hijacks their reasoning. I think they can't get past that idea. Like I think Kant maybe had a similar thing. He said, oh, well, like, you know, like, no, we have to have free will because like the world wouldn't make sense if we didn't. So again, I think this is like, you know, I'm I'm not sure what the answer is, but
I just had a thought because we don't have free will and the world doesn't make sense. But it doesn't make any sense whether you believe in free will or not.
Yeah, it's still pretty confusing, but I identify with the heart of your claim, George, and I think that's kind of making me think within the religious context there does seem to have been a religious priming or a priming. I'm sorry, a religious priming, a social priming. There seems to have been a social priming because I mean, even within like the religious sections, you're more likely, I think, nowadays to encounter a Christian who now a lot of them sympathize with homosexuals. Now a lot of them are no longer skirting the poor in the same ways that they have in the past. So all that lends itself to this idea that we need to stop blaming people and allow people to be who they are and stop saying that everybody has a choice in everything. And so it might be that these things are already happening within certain religious sects where people are going to be they're already primed to receive a message like this. And a lot of them genuinely, if you talk to them, and that's kind of the positive of the religious aspect, not that obviously atheists are immoral or anything, but some Christians are really infatuated with the idea of love and loving one another, and that lends itself to the idea of stopping, you know, to not blame people. So I think that might help it as well. And so I think we might be in a time where I think we might be in a beneficial time where people are more receptive to an idea like this if we try to meet people on common grounds and don't try to push the religious aspect so much and be like, really, you shouldn't be religious, but really be like, that's great that you want to be compassionate, you know, towards people. That's great that you want to love people. That's great that you want to make the world a better place. This might be how you do it, is to view people differently and to stop. This is a reason that you no longer need to blame people and can actually genuinely want to help them.
Yeah, you know, I had a funny thought related to this. I was thinking, what if there was somebody, now I don't think it'd be any of us, but there was somebody with the incredible talent to somehow reform Christianity in such a way as to promote Jesus the as the determinist or the incompatibilist that knew nothing was anybody's fault, and that was why he had compassion on them or something.
Oh yeah, forgive them, Father, they know not what they do.
Yeah, exactly. That's
Yeah.
the thing that Yeah,
That's a determinist saying right there. You know, they don't know what they're doing. I can't blame. I have to forgive them because they don't know what they're doing. Like it's a natural repercussion of the determinist thought process.
yeah, and
Yeah, they feel because they may feel like that goes against other parts of the Bible, which contradicts
Yeah,
itself.
well, yeah, the
that's
Bible
the
contradicts all the time. There's no getting out of that one. But what I'm
yeah.
saying is that each Christian basically they grab onto certain parts of the Bible or whatever they think is in the Bible, whether it is or not, and ignore other parts. So depending on the kind of person they are, if they're a compassionate person, they're going to focus more on the love and forgiveness aspects of Christianity rather than the, you know, the hellfire and all the punishment and the anti-gay thing. So I think what may happen is if those people who are already moral, who happen to be religious, grab onto the message of determinism or no free will, and then they have that philosophical backing to what they were already trying to do, it may change the reputation that such a view has, at least.
Yeah, I agree with you, Eileen.
But guys, how do we address the need of people to believe that God is good? That, you know, 'cause like, I mean, one way that I've thought of partially addresses it, but it's not a complete answer. It's that, you know, if this causal chain goes back eternally into the past, there actually is never a time where God made any decision at all, so he can't be blamed for evil. You know,
Yeah.
you know, but the problem with that is that we can't conclude that God is good either. And then people, you know, like the belief that God cares about us and all that. So like, you know, again, I certainly appealing to religious people's sense of social justice and you know, forgiveness and stuff. It will work on, I think, a lot of the more intelligent religious people. But I'm still, you know, I'm still grappling with this. You know, how do you reach people who need to believe that God is good?
Yeah,
Who are the guys that handle snakes and stuff like that? What religion are they?
the snake handlers.
Yeah, the people who handle snakes. I'm just wondering because when one of them gets bitten by a snake and dies, do they still think God is good? Or
That's a good question. I've heard about those.
Usually those handlers come with some kind of anti-venom according to what snake they're dealing with. But yeah.
yeah,
But no, David, they would believe that, you know, they probably you wonder whether they believe in free will, so they're not going to blame God for that guy. You know, the snake handler deserved it.
right,
Yeah,
right,
they'll
yeah.
blame the snake.
I guess God was good enough to take the snake handler to heaven.
Oh yeah, that guy got the who you're talking about. I think they're just Protestant, but the guy who did that, he got bit and died, and his son like immediately started doing the thing that he was doing.
Yeah, that was the one. That was the one. So I
Wow.
was just
But
wondering, at what point can you say that God is not good? Like, I mean, is it good for you to live? If so, take a bullet, put it in a revolver, and pull the trigger. And
yeah,
if you're still alive afterwards, then maybe God is good. But if you're not, who knows?
yeah.
Well,
Well, I think they'll probably just go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, I wanted to say that, well, I agree with George that this is a big problem in the minds of many people. They want to believe in a God that is all good, and of course that provides the basis for why they want to believe in free will. But even, yeah, and any proposed solution to it also seems to fail because even though, yeah, it's true, God couldn't have a free will, whatever God you may believe in also can't be the chooser of things because whether it's causal or acausal, even God could not be the controller of it. There would be an infinite regress or uncaused event. And so what we're dealing with is there's absolutely no one in control who makes a real choice. Therefore, if there's no one in control, there's no one omnipotent or even close to omnipotent. Therefore, there is no God, and it gets weirder from there.
Wait a minute, say that again, Chandler.
Yeah, basically, because remember, since they believe God is good and God is what is in control, but God can't be in control because God can't have a free will. No matter what form of determinism or indeterminism you believe in, there can't be a God in control. And if God is not in control, how can he? Why call him God?
No, but they believe that God has a free will.
Yeah.
I know,
That's
but
exactly why I say all powerful, man.
yeah,
That's
that's it. That's so essential to the idea of God is that God has to have free will for these people. God has to have free will to be all powerful. And so it's almost like, to challenge belief in free will, you are basically promoting atheism, because without the idea of free will, there can't be God in the relevant sense.
Well, I do want to challenge that a little bit and go into what George is saying, because I mean, the Eastern religions see God. I understand Christianity is an Eastern religion. I meant Buddhism, Taoism, Jainism. Those religions see God much differently than the Abrahamic God. Like, God is both good and evil in Buddhist sects. God is very nuanced, and you can't really understand him. God is this thing that transcends our understanding. So God can, like, God wouldn't be about control in the Buddhist sense. Control is something that humans try to have. Like, God transcends the ideas of feudal human, behaviors like control. So God would be probably more like, I think, what I've heard George describe as being an acutheist, but more like that God just is, like, God is this force that encompasses the universe and all its intricacies, but you can't expect it to be like something you can make what your mind wants it to be, where he or she is making these very human choices. So to me, if you want to reform Christianity, it would be to try to get it to intermingle more with ideas from those Eastern religions, like Buddhism and Taoism.
But,
I,
but
God
don't,
can be
I,
good and evil.
don't they have the idea of karma, which is kind of a similar concept, like perhaps something you've done in a past life will come back to get you in this life, and that's why you're
Absolutely.
suffering.
Yeah. So there are downsides to it, like, the just world hypothesis. But in terms of trying to get them to see that God could be both good and evil, Buddhists do believe that. So
So
if you're trying,
basically, what we're saying is that the Christians, and the other Abrahamic religious people, need to be more like Buddhists or pantheists in a sense.
yeah, like if you're gonna try to get them, like, okay, you're not gonna get rid of the idea of God. You want to keep it, or you want to keep this type of God. So, like George was saying, how do you get them to see that God can be both good and evil? That's more, Buddhist or whatever.
Actually, a question just came to my mind. I'm wondering, among naturalists, scientists, I wonder if there, there's a tendency for people to attribute goodness to the universe, like the universe is inherently good. But I wonder about it. I guess thinking about it now, it seems like that morality wouldn't apply to the universe. That it's, um, but but you know, yeah, no, I don't know, because that, because
Yeah,
we have.
I see.
Go ahead, Quaid.
Well, I see what you're. I think I see what you're getting at. Like, does it have to do with, like, the way that they engage with the universe, as if it's this good thing that you learn about, and, like,
Well, just like, for example, like, the universe exists. That's like, that's a priori. That's axiomatic, right? It's like, it
mhm.
doesn't, it's beyond, needing to be proved. And so, like, maybe categorically, in principle, maybe people hold that existence is good. Because, like, without existence there could be no happiness, and, like, the purpose of goodness is happiness. I
Yeah,
mean,
Yeah, that's an interesting one. The idea that existence is good.
It depends, I guess, because a lot of people go to different countries to kind of end their lives if they're suffering quite badly.
no, but
yeah.
David, I'm talking about, like, not human existence. I'm talking about the existence of the entire universe of reality.
Huh, okay.
Yeah, here's a question, guys. Let's suppose there were no sentient creatures, at least. There was nothing that felt pleasure or pain anyway. Would existence of the universe, whatever that would look like, be good, even without
And
pleasure?
Chandler, that's great because like that can apply to God also. In other words, like let's say we assume, and I think it'd be a improbable assumption, but like let's say we were to assume that the only sentient life in the universe was here on Earth, right? So that life evolved on Earth about 4.5 billion years ago. The universe is almost 14 billion years old. So before life evolved, there couldn't be either goodness or evil, because like I think the accurate definition of goodness is evil is what creates pain and pleasure, happiness and unhappiness. So yeah, both theistically and naturalistically, I think you're left concluding that God was neither good nor bad for much longer than God has been good or bad.
Hmm. Yeah, it's an
And
interesting
the
idea
universe.
that the universe, before the concepts of pleasure and pain, or good or bad, or any such things were around, there was just existence.
Yeah, I think a lot of this goes back to what you were almost getting at, which it seems like, and it cuts back to a lot of issues that naturalists have with the way the general population thinks, which is that we're 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 conceited. So we see everything from our perspective. So it's like we want to see, really, it's okay for good to mean something to us on a subjective level, but to start to attribute that to the like, so what was it like before people who were like me or beings who were like me were around? And it's like, well, are you that special? It's automatically attributing the special aspect to your own, as if planets moving around in this mathematical formula aren't, well, I guess strangely enough, good enough or whatever. Like it's really all mathematical, even though it means something to us personally. It doesn't have to mean anything to the universe.
And you
Like it,
know, I would like to add on to what you just said there, Quaid, because um, you may have heard this before. Like what a lot of religious people will say to atheists is that, well, if you're an atheist, then like you don't believe in a higher power or a higher purpose. And I'm like, well, what is it that's good enough for you? What is it that's high enough or good enough? Like, what purpose do you accept? And there's all this talk about a higher power. Higher than what? A higher purpose. Higher than what other purpose? What other purpose are we referring to that you're saying there's a higher purpose?
that's a good point. I've actually never heard it phrased that way, but that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I really question, yeah, how is the universe existing and all this cool planets moving around and all that stuff? Yeah, how is that not good enough? How is that? Why can't we just call that good? Regardless of whether or not there are humans or even other animals that feel positive or negative states of emotion or whatever.
Yeah.
Huh. I'm lost in deep thought now. Yeah. But yeah, guys, this is really good because I think George mentioned some really interesting points about, we have these beliefs that people have about God being all good, as well as what he mentioned earlier about people's fears like, oh, civilization will collapse if people stop believing in free will, which I have an interesting response to. Hey, civilization's collapsing anyway, and besides, climate change is going to kill us
Pretty
all.
much.
So we're all going to die anyway. I'm not even trying to save humanity anymore because I think it's too late. My purpose, guys, is so we won't blame each other and be fighting while we all die.
Yeah.
Well, if our civilization is devolving, year by year, decade by decade, then I think it's imperative that our chemists engineer like a very effective happiness pill. Because if we're going, we might as well be blissed out about it. Yeah.
Yeah, good one, George. I think we can get down with that idea.
I think they call that ecstasy. Isn't that right? And then, yeah, but no, I know what you mean. I think that might have downsides too. Things always being happy and blissful, but really just maybe to me it's about satisfaction. Like being satisfied is the thing. But then again, you can be, you can be in a really bad situation and still be satisfied, and it'll be an excuse for the powerful to keep you down. Well, you're satisfied, so you shouldn't complain. But yeah.
Yeah, it is interesting, but yeah, I think that yet at a certain level there has to be a way for us to find either our satisfaction or happiness, given the fact that we are powerless. And I'm not just talking about that we're powerless to make a free choice or to truly make genuine choices because there's no free will. I'm talking about the fact that we can't really do a blasted thing to make everyone on the planet agree to do things to stop climate change. And when the government of our country wants to go to war against another country, there's nothing we as citizens can actually do to stop it. And it's for this reason that I've been thinking a lot lately just on how do I find happiness or satisfaction in spite of feeling like nothing I do is going to make a difference?
Well, I mean, I work with that a lot, and I used to teach, well, all right, like, the Buddha was right, suffering comes from desiring, desiring things that things are good, desiring that people are, are good, that, and so more recently, um, I'm thinking, well, it's not the desiring, the wanting that creates problems for us. It's the conclusion, the misguided understanding that when we don't get what we want, when the world isn't the way we want it to be, when we're not satisfied, that automatically, or the appropriate or right response to that, or necessary response, is for us to become, disappointed or frustrated or lose our happiness. So Chandler, I think the answer is like, we should overcome all manner of suffering, of unhappiness, dissatisfaction, simply because it doesn't, generally, it doesn't do us any good. It's not necessary, and
Yep.
it hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where like yeah, it doesn't actually accomplish anything to be upset about that you have this desire to do something and you can't do it, but being upset about it doesn't actually change anything. So it's like I'm just right now personally I'm in that stage of trying to not be upset about the things that normally upset me.
Yeah,
Well,
or angry. I was talking to a girl at the writing center about some of this stuff, and I told her how I used to have all these anxiety issues, and I used to be really concerned, and I would work myself into a frenzy to the point where I would start to panic, and I would be really angry at people. I was like, one of the things I realized is like I'm only hurting myself in those circumstances. It never does anything to the other person that I'm angry. It only ever hurts me. And so I was like, so what's the point in it? And she was like, well, if someone does something wrong to you and you get angry, you might do something or whatever. And I was like, could you do something and not feel angry? And then she was kind of like, well, yeah. So then what does the component of anger add to that situation? Apart from just making you hurt yourself,
No.
and then she kind of realized that.
Yeah, it doesn't add anything.
yeah, basically, like the negative emotions, anger, sadness, fear, they generally work to alert us of something that may be like anger is supposed to be a reaction to a perceived injustice. I mean, it may be unjust, it may not be, but it's an emotion. And then, yeah, once our cognitive faculties kick in and start to explore, is this a threat? How do I address it? Then the anger serves absolutely no purpose at that point. Um,
Yep.
So like with suffering in general, yeah, for those of us who are not evolved enough to really be as compassionate as we could be, and maybe that includes all of us, toward others. Sometimes our suffering reminds us that other people are suffering, so it kind of like it encourages compassion and empathy toward others. That's the only kind of like utility I can see for us, suffering to any degree.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of that before.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, I will admit that we've strayed a little bit off topic from what we were originally talking about, which usually happens, guys. Yeah, because
Yeah.
we were talking about which was more harmful between the libertarians and compatibilists. Did we actually resolve that one?
No.
I don't think we did.
Yeah, I don't think we did either. I mean, at this point, I mean, I tend to think that libertarians may be slightly more harmful, for a few reasons, but it's still a close one. Um, but I don't know. I suppose we could perhaps continue it in a future podcast or something.
Possibly. I thought we brought up a lot of good things though, because I mean we were talking about religion, and I think we talked about a lot of different things that I think go into that issue, and it might just be you can't determine it, and because they both have their. Maybe we just need to reach anybody that we can. We need to recognize that's going to come from libertarians sometimes, and that's going to come from compatibilists. But the benefit of our worldview is we don't have to single out groups. We don't have to segregate ourselves from people. We can sympathize with anybody who wants to sympathize with us.
Right, that's a good point. I mean, we'll be talking to all different types of people about it. So it's not like we even have to have a side. We don't even have to come to a conclusion about the compatibilists or libertarian thing. But it was an interesting talk, and so was the whole God thing, too. And here's my thing about it is that, like, to the extent that people did move towards a more Buddhist, Taoist, pantheist, or acutheist, like George, type of view of God. By so doing, that eliminates the Abrahamic concept of God, which basically eliminates the type of God that I believed in and have now seen as incoherent. So I mean, I'm down with that idea. I just wonder, will people go for that? Do you suppose that, like, I mean, I can see how it helps them if they go for that. Um, I just don't know how current Christians, Muslims, or Jews would grab onto that idea because it is very foreign.
Yeah, Muslims I think will be harder. But there's a lot of Christian sects out there who are they're basically hippies. They're Christians, but there are Christians out there who, my father is a Catholic who loves Buddhism. He's Catholic, but he really latches on to the idea of God's not good or evil. He just is. And you have to sympathize with people. But he's a Catholic, so I think there's certain Christian sects that already lend themselves to that, but obviously not all of them.
Yeah, it's an interesting one because from the background I come from, it's not like that at all. It's like God is a man in the sky, and he doesn't like things you do, and he will burn you. And it's you know what I'm saying? That is everything that I knew growing up. And
Yep,
so
that always messed me up.
yeah, but he loves you.
And Chandler, that leads us
I
to
never understood how he can love you, but that place exists.
Yeah,
yeah, I hear that, WSD.
yeah.
And then the other thing is like, people say, oh yes, free will is such a great gift to humankind. In other words, like, I was pointing this out to a friend earlier today. Wait a minute, let's say you're God, right? Or like you're a parent, right? And you have the ability to, like, let's say there's a heaven and hell, like to either give your kids free will or not, in which case they'll do good, because that's what you want. So like free will, it's actually the most harmful gift, quote unquote, that you could give anyone, because that, with free will, you're opening up the possibility, like under the Judeo-Christian paradigm, that your kids or your creatures are going to like suffer eternally because you gave them a free will.
Yeah,
It's like the biggest curse you can give someone. Yeah.
yeah, basically, George, it's like programming a computer chess program with a glitch that makes it do the wrong moves.
Yeah.
That's what it's like.
That's called playing easy.
Yeah, basically when you're playing on easy mode on some computers, they program them to make mistakes so you can beat them. And that's almost like what free will is in certain religious contexts, is free will is the ability to be able to do the wrong thing rather than just being forced to do the right thing all the time. And I love to always do the right thing all the time. That's what I want to do.
Yeah, it's weird because also under theistic philosophy, theology, whatever, I think the understanding of, some people will contest this is that, like, well, when you get to heaven, then everybody does good, right? But they'll say, there's some people still say you
No,
have a
you're
free
forced to
will.
worship God for all eternity.
Well, yeah, I mean that's the reality. So, and the other part of this is like we get back to kind of like the reason, at least within Christianity, that the term free will was coined. When Augustine was saying that, like, well, it would be like, under the no free will thing, like God makes us do what we do, that's wrong, and then punishes us. So all of a sudden, you have a very unfair God, and that's our challenge. How we got to find, again, within the secular, naturalistic perspective. That's obviously not a problem, but in terms of like swaying religious people, we gotta have answers to this stuff.
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. I mean, I am interested in this line of reasoning because, yeah, we got to realize that we live with a majority of people who are not like us. I mean, really, they're not like us in so many ways. They believe in free will. They have strange attitudes, and there are people who are racist and very speciesist and sexist, and these attitudes still exist. And it's almost like a discussion of, well, how do you get people to not be racist? It's like, let's go back to the time in America when all the whites hated blacks and owned them as slaves and all that, and let's talk them out of being racist. They would kill
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, but I think you're onto something
Much.
with what I think you're onto something with what George was saying, because he wants to know how do you reform the idea, and you were saying like Christians already cherry pick the Bible, so like really, if you want them to focus on something different, it's to point out those scriptures that lend to the determinist type of philosophy or reality.
Yeah.
And basically, like, I think most theists, maybe all theists, believe that God is all powerful. And just for example, just as the logic of the laws of nature controlling everything, therefore nothing that's not the laws of nature controlling anything is impossible. If God is all powerful, then logically nothing has any power but God. I mean, you would think that would make sense, but that's the problem
Yeah.
with the religion. There's so many logical inconsistencies.
Yeah. It's very interesting, but yeah, in future episodes, I would like to talk about the idea of reforming religion and how one might go about that. That's an interesting talk, because we may be able to incorporate the no free will idea into certain religions, and there is even a small minority of Christians who promote veganism as the biblical view. Not sure how they do it, but people will try. So it might be worth a shot to explore that idea.
Yeah, like the God of the Bible and free will or something like that.
You're being led, man.
What's that, Will?
Oh, I really thought this was on mute. Sorry.
Oh yeah, he thought he was muted. Yeah, well, okay, we've been talking for about an hour and 15 minutes. So perhaps I need to close this because I need to get to bed soon. But
Yeah, same here. And plus, I gotta run to the store. I'm getting hungry.
ah, Yeah, well, yeah, this has been real good, guys. Have you all had fun?
Yeah, it's excellent, Chandler. Thanks.
Yeah,
Yep.
definitely. This is what we have so much fun doing this podcast, and we're talking about some very important stuff. So, were there any final remarks from anyone before I end the recording?
Free will does not exist.
Yeah, free will does not exist. And even if it did exist, it would be a glitch that forces us to make the wrong moves.
And free will is the biggest curse you could ever give a sentient being.
Yeah, not the Sam Harris book. That's good.
The what?
Sam Harris book, Free Will.
Oh yeah, Sam Harris wrote a book called Free Will, and it's really short and to the point. Yeah, okay. Well, you've been listening to Free Will, Science, and Religion with a bunch of people talking about all kinds of topics. We strayed way off topic, but we had fun. And it was probably educational and really funny too. So thank you for listening, and goodbye.